Welcome, everyone. I'm East Peterson Trujillo, they, them pronouns. I'm a climate financial policy campaigner with Public Citizen. Thank you for joining us. I am here with Yaya and Alexia, who are interpreting into Spanish, and Glashanda and MJ, who are interpreting into ASL, and with Rita and Isela, who are doing cart captioning in English and Spanish, respectively.
Bienvenidos a todos. Soy East Pearson Trujillo y ella, pronombre ella, y soy creadora de campañas para políticas económicas climáticas con Public Citizen. Estoy aquí con Yaya y Alexia, que estarán interpretando al español, y Gloshanda y MJ, que estarán interpretando la lengua de señas norteamericana. Y con Rita e Isela, que estarán haciendo subtítulos en vivo en inglés y español, respectivamente.
To access English language captions, click on the arrow next to the button that says CC at the bottom of your screen and select Show Captions. To access Spanish language captions, click on the link you'll find in the chat. And a note, this session is being recorded.
Para acceder a los subtítulos en inglés, puede hacer clic en la flecha cerca del botón que dice CC en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccione Mostrar subtítulos. Para acceder a subtítulos en español, puede hacer clic en el enlace que encontrará en la caja de chat. Y un aviso es que la sesión está siendo grabada.
The Language Justice team is here today to interpret from English into ASL and Spanish and to provide captioning, working within a framework called Language Justice.
El equipo de justicia del lenguaje está aquí hoy para interpretar entre inglés y español y para proporcionar subtítulos, trabajando con un marco que se llama la justicia del lenguaje.
Language justice includes a commitment to everyone's full presentation and capability to communicate in our languages. We acknowledge all the languages here today, and especially the languages of the indigenous people of this land.
La justicia del lenguaje incluye el compromiso y de la presencia plena de todos y la capacidad de poder comunicarnos en nuestros idiomas. Reconocemos todos los idiomas presentes aquí hoy y en particular los idiomas de los pueblos indígenas de estas tierras.
In general, in a language justice framework, we use more than one language actively, and in the future, we hope to organize these conversations in that way. For today, folks will be speaking in English with interpreting into Spanish and ASL. So if you prefer to listen in Spanish, you'll be able to select the Spanish channel in a moment.
In general, in a language justice framework, we use more than one language actively, and in the future, we hope to organize these conversations in that way. But for today, folks will be speaking in English. En general, con la justicia del lenguaje se usa más de un idioma activamente y en el futuro esperamos organizar estas conversaciones así. Para hoy, los presentadores hablarán en inglés con interpretación al español y la lenguaje de señas norteamericana. Así que si usted prefiere escuchar en español, va a poder elegir un canal de español en unos pocos minutos.
We'll be using the Zoom interpreting function, which is already enabled. If you're joining from a computer, you'll see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining from a tablet or phone, click on More, and you'll see a menu that will include an option called Language Interpretation. If you can't see the globe or the language interpretation option, send me a message here on the Zoom, and I can help you access it. To listen to interpreting, click the globe icon or language interpretation, then choose your language channel. If you're using a tablet or phone, make sure to click on Done once you choose the language. Now we're going to do a quick test of the interpreting function, and Yaya will finish this announcement so I can be available for tech support.
Vamos a estar utilizando la función de interpretación de Zoom que ya está activada. Si se está conectando con su computadora, usted verá un icono en la parte de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si se está conectando con tableta o teléfono, va a pulsar en el símbolo que dice más y verá un menú que incluye la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Si usted no puede ver el mundo de icono o el icono de mundo o la opción de interpretación de idiomas después que se haya activado la función, o sea, si no lo puede ver desde ahora, puede ponerse en contacto con IST para recibir apoyo técnico. Para poder escuchar la interpretación, va a pulsar el icono de mundo o interpretación de idiomas. A continuación, puede elegir su canal de idiomas. Si está usando una tableta o teléfono, asegúrese de hacer clic en finalizar después de escoger su idioma. Ahora vamos a hacer una breve prueba de la función de interpretación y ya terminará este anuncio para que yo pueda estar disponible para apoyo técnico. And we're going to continue this announcement in English. So everybody that wish to speak in Spanish should be able to be hearing Alexia in the Spanish channel. So I'm going to speak a little bit more in English. And so please give me a thumbs up if you can hear Alexia in the Spanish channel. East, you're the only one I can see. So if you can hear her, please let me know. And as I said, we will be using the simultaneous interpreting for the rest of the announcement. Thank you, East. Now, everyone who prefers to participate in Spanish should be on the Spanish channel. You can click on mute original audio to hear just the interpreter. If you can't hear the interpreter, please don't suffer in silence. Use the chat or contact East for help. Folks who understand Spanish will have noticed that we use the E ending instead of the traditional A or O. For example, when we said bienvenides, welcome, as we began. This is not a pronunciation error, but an intentional effort to create exclusive spaces and avoid making assumptions about people's genders. Finally, thank you, STMP, including Partners Action Center on Raising the Economy, Positive Money US, Public Citizen, and the Sunrise Project for making it possible for us to be here. We are so pleased to be able to support this multilingual space since we feel a strong solidarity with the work that you do. And now this event can officially begin. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, everyone. Erica, we can head to slide 2 for just a moment. And then this is where the links or the interpretation is. And then slide 3. So we'll be sharing links in the chat throughout today's event. We'll also be sending around a recording, all of the slides and resources that are shared today. Everyone will be muted during the event, but please leave questions in English or Spanish in the chat. We'll collect them and provide answers in the resource packet we share out after the event. We do not have live text translation of the chat, so please note that long form comments in that space are not accessible to everyone. And with that, I'll pass it to Tracy to get us started.
Oh, thank you so much, Easton. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And I'd like to get us started off with our land acknowledgement. Public Citizen and I am here in the DC metro area, so I will be giving my acknowledgement for that. But you can learn what land you're on if you don't already know. There are some links for you to check that out. And we've also included a link to encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and what they are and why we do them. So today, I would like to share that it's important to create dialogue and honor those who've been historically and systemically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. I am here on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respect to Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. All right. So sorry. You know what, you all, I'm going to ask for some grace today. I have the flu and I'm not my usual super energetic self. So please have some grace for me. Thank you. But I have a little fun question to get us rolling here.
I see 1 second. I think,
Oh,
can you just let Erica know when to advance the slides? So
oh, sorry. I'm
that's
trying to read
okay.
the script and okay, so now yes, I will say slide 5, please, Erica. Thank you.
So I think we can go one more now.
Okay, slide 6. Okay. Sorry about that. So, quick question. How much money do you all think the fossil fuel industry makes per minute? Uh-huh. And let me now introduce our first speaker from Rise St. James. Oh, next slide, please. Is this slide 7? I'm so sorry. I'm like getting off track here.
I think
Okay.
we're in the right place with the slides. Yeah. So you can just share a little bit about the problem and solution, big picture, and then introduce Sharon.
All righty. Thank you. So, big problem. Overlapping crises. What's Wall Street's role in those overlapping crises? And what is the carbon bubble? What is the solution? Maybe we need to regulate big financial actors. So I would like to introduce Sharon Levine from Rise St. James so she can tell us a little bit about those problems and solutions. Welcome, Sharon.
Hello, how are you all? Thanks for having me. I'm from St. James, Louisiana. I'm the director and founder of a faith-based grassroots organization. Back in 2018, our governor, John Bell Edward, announced that a $9.4 billion industry would be built in St. James Parish in the 5th District, 2 miles from my home. In October of that year, we sat in my den. It was about 8 to 9 people here, and we formed an organization. We didn't have a name at that time, and we didn't know how to go about doing the work that we wanted to do. All we knew was that we wanted to stop Formosa Plastics from coming into St. James Parish. Our second meeting in October, we had 2 members of the NAACP to come to my home in my garage. We had over 20 people there, and they helped us organize and gave us tips on how we should go about doing these things. That's when we came up with the name Rise St. James. On November 3rd, 2018, we had our first march. We marched on the highway not too far from the land that Formosa bought. Formosa Plastics is an industry that came from Taiwan. They can't build in Taiwan because they put them out. They didn't want them to come and pollute over there because they already polluted the land over there. And so they tried to find somewhere else to go. So they came to St. James. Because the area that they bought, our parish officials changed our zoning laws to future industrial. It was future residential. And they went back and they changed it to future industrial, making that area open for people from overseas or out of the country to come and buy land. When they get here, they see that there are people that live here, but that didn't matter to them. They still wanted to come in. So in St. James, we have 7 districts. I'm in the 5th district, and in the 5th district, we have 12 facilities in the 5th district. The air is so toxic that we can't breathe the air like a normal person would go into another state or another parish and breathe the air. When we get up in the morning, it's a smell that you will smell. It smells like a rotten egg, smell like chlorine, sometimes ammonia, and sometimes it's just it's an unknown smell. We have people that's been sick for years, not knowing the pollution was coming from industry. As we went on and tried to figure it out, I came down with autoimmune hepatitis in 2016. I came down with aluminum in my body. Then I came down with lead in my body. I was tested for cancer, but I thank God I don't have it. I have family members with cancer. My sister-in-law died with cancer. A friend of mine died with throat cancer and all kind of different ailments. We had our hurricane came in August of last year, Hurricane Ida. That played a big part in climate change because we saw where the hurricanes are getting to be worse and even more powerful. And it really destroyed my home and other people's homes. We haven't rebuilt yet because so many people are trying to get work done on their homes. It's hard to get contractors. And Formosa Plastics has a bad track record. They are a serial offender in Texas. They were sued for $50 million for polluting the air over there in Fort Comfort, Texas. And we are looking into ways to stop the funding of Formosa Plastics. We target Chase Bank in New Orleans, asking people to pull their money from the banks because they are trying to get funding from Bank of America, Chase Banks, Wells Fargo, and so forth. And if these people don't fund them the money, they can't build. So we formed this organization as a means of protecting our lives, protecting our water, our air, and our soil. We cannot plant a garden because the toxic air is polluting our soil. It's polluting our water. Whenever we pass by certain facilities at a certain time of the day, there's a smog in the air and you can smell it and they are steady polluting. After the hurricane, we had one facility that had an oil spill with their storage tanks. They didn't even try to report it to the public. They didn't try to contact the officials. They just kept on polluting it. So Rise St. James did live stream. We reported it to the public. We called the EPA to let them know what was going on. We didn't hear back from them. We had a visit from our new EPA from Washington, Michael Regan. He came by to look at the devastation that's going on in here because people are steady dying. They are dying rapidly, mostly with cancer. So he came down and he looked and he saw for himself, and he's going to give us feedback on what he saw. And we also have the Army Corps of Engineers to put a halt to Formosa, at least for a year or two. They are doing a complete EIS on Formosa. Then we also have the boardwalk pipeline to try to fight, because if Formosa gets their permit, this boardwalk pipeline will come through the property that they purchase. And also on that property that they purchased, there are enslaved grave sites on that property. They did not tell our parish council that they discovered the grave sites. When Rise St. James found out about it, we reported it to the parish officials. We thought that they would pull the permit from them, but they didn't. They still support this plant to come in here. If Formosa Plastic built in St. James, the toxic air would pollute the 5th district almost triple time the amount that we're breathing right now. It would pollute it double times the amount in the parish. Our parish official can stop Formosa Plastics right now in its tracks, but they won't do it. They won't even join with Rise St. James so we can get together and talk about it and try to stop this industry. They refuse to talk with us. They refuse our help. That's why we're going further with what we're doing. We, as a people, will get together and we will stop Formosa Plastics. Rise St. James. That was why we created Rise St. James, because no other organization was trying to stop any industry from coming into St. James Parish. And we also trying to write grants to get air monitors to be put up in the parish with these existing industries that are polluting us right now. So I just would like to say thank you all for having me. And this is our story.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That is an incredible story of people power. It's an incredible story of how environmental racism actually works, and interestingly, with a international sheen to it. And I did not know that about Formosa, that it's a Taiwanese company. Wow, that really touched me. Well, East, are we on slide 9?
I think this slide is where we're supposed to be at the moment. And you can share a little bit more about.
Sure. I just want to make sure, because I didn't say anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think Erica's predicting us now.
Okay, yay. Thank you, Erica. So, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how climate change puts our financial system at risk, check out this great explainer video. Also, I'm going to drop that, or can someone drop that in the chat? Thank you so much. Thank you, Aki. So let me just share a little bit here about the impacts here of climate change. Number one, physical risk. And thank you for those fabulous illustrations, because they're perfect. Physical risk obviously means, and what we're seeing all around the globe, increased fires, increased flooding, increased sea level rise. We're seeing an intensity of storms that is unseen. We're seeing rains that used to be 100-year rains that are coming now on a single year. The second aspect of climate risk is the transition risk. So if we are not, so just speak about the United States, of course, if we are not moving towards a more sustainable path, when the change occurs, it's going to have to happen so much more abruptly and cause much more friction and can really have terrible impacts on our financial system. Just for example, I think you all may remember when COVID started, that oil prices bottomed out, and they were so low that oil companies could not pay people to offload the oil from the ships, and they had to just circle because no one wanted to buy it. It was $0 a barrel. Well, imagine if that happened and it stayed that way abruptly. It can cause so many, not just ripples, but terrible waves in our financial system. Next slide, please. So, in order to protect our financial system from those physical and transition risks, we need regulation. We can already see what is going to happen. If Exxon's scientists could predict the impacts of temperature rise and climate change, we too now are predicting what can happen to our financial system in the future if we do not prepare. Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Sorry. Thank you. And whoops, give me 1 second here. So I would like to introduce our very fabulous next speaker, Lisa Ann Hamilton. Oh, Lisa, please go right ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I was waiting for the slides to go there.
Oh, no problem.
So first, thank you, Trace. Trace, I hope you feel better. I just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Lisa Ann Hamilton. I am an attorney and regulatory consultant. I've often worked to address the causes and impacts of climate change, including the physical and transition risks that have the potential to create adverse financial and economic impacts, and the policy interventions needed to foster a just transition for people on the planet. If you could go to the next slide. I just wanted to put this one up here because first, it is always a pleasure to see Ms. Sharon, and I applaud her and her courageous efforts to protect her home and her St. James Parish community. Cancer Alley is this widening corridor between Texas and Louisiana, known for its polluting oil and gas infrastructure that is responsible for some of the country's highest rates of asthma, cancer, heart disease from the air and water pollution. And this disproportionately impacts African Americans. And as a UN human rights experts recently stated, the continued development of fossil fuel infrastructure in Cancer Alley is a form of environmental racism and threatens the right to life, the right to health, and among other basic human rights. And so again, thank you, Ms. Sharon, for your work and your fight. And Tracy, you did such a good job of introducing this idea of climate-related financial risk. And if you go to the next slide, I just want to introduce these concepts and the discussion about the OCC, or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I really want to give some context about what climate-related financial risk looks like. And to really sort of get a little bit more granular about the connections between the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and the realities of carbon assets and the sudden decline, something very similar to what Tracy was describing, where instead of a sudden drop in asset value that exists for just a few months, the concern of what would a prolonged decline in assets look like. Assets create bubbles because they are overvalued, and there are concerns that with the high risk of these assets declining, we run the risk of creating a same stranded asset crisis where these assets could be abandoned before the end of their useful life, and that these investments, furthermore, that should we not take climate policies initiatives now, we run the risk of locking in the demand for fracked gas and other fossil fuels for decades to come that make it impossible for us to reach the 1.5 degree target. So it's incredibly important that we act now. It's incredibly important that we act to engage financial regulators. So when I talk about the OCC, I want to really emphasize the importance of interconnection among financial regulators. These financial regulators have complementary roles and responsibilities and oversight. They work together in coordination and communicate standards that must be applied evenly across the financial system. So that the new projects that we're seeing, new investments in fossil fuels, are moving us in the wrong direction. And it will be critical to continue the kind of engagement that East will speak to later, to submit our public comments, to ensure that financial regulators know that we understand climate change does pose a significant financial and economic risk. So just to answer, I'm looking at the chat. OCC is the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and I'll get into that with a little bit more detail in subsequent slides. So if we could move to the next slide. And so this slide here, this slide 4 is sort of an anatomy of the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And I apologize if it is somewhat difficult to see, but I would ask that if you could just imagine that if each one were a domino, and that when you have abrupt changes, that you can create a domino effect in asset prices dropping. When in the housing instance of a housing crisis, these bad loans, people stopped paying on those loans. That created a crisis in liquidity. And it also simultaneously, because many of those loans were packaged into mortgage-backed securities as well as collateralized debt obligations, when that revenue coming from those debt payments stopped, that created a subsequent set of financial declines and sudden abrupt changes that created the subprime crisis. So that you created a domino effect across each of these squares, where subsequently it led to credit risk issues. It created insolvency among banks. It ultimately led to a sovereign debt crisis and a prolonged recession. So the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is one of several US financial regulators that plays a role in ensuring that the financial system and that these institutions that created were the starting point for many of these sudden asset declines do not reach that point again. A big part of the OCC's responsibility is to look at capital reserves and capital requirements to ensure that those asset declines do not occur. Next slide, please. One of the sort of basic principles that I also want to set forth is that when you look at what creates a stable financial system, that means that for those banking institutions, they have more assets than they have liabilities, so that they have positive equity that keeps them solvent. If those assets decline too rapidly and you suddenly have more liabilities than you do assets, that institution becomes insolvent. And for those of you who are much more financial experts, you understand that this is a simplification, but I really want to make this point that watching and encouraging our financial regulators to take climate-related financial risk in the same way, to understand the assets that could suddenly drop in value, whether those assets are collateralized debt obligations in the form of mortgage-backed securities in areas of the country that are increasingly subject to wildfire, increasingly subject to sea level rise, that those assets are subject to vulnerabilities, and that this needs to be a part of the monitoring responsibilities for financial regulators like the OCC. Next slide, please. So a brief overview about the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The OCC gets its power under the National Bank Act. It is one of the several categories of federal financial regulators. You have depository regulators. The OCC is one. Also, the FDIC, Federal Depository Insurance Corporation, make sure that your deposits in your bank are in fact protected. You have securities market regulators. You have government-sponsored enterprise regulators, GSEs, and then you have consumer protection regulators. So the OCC is one of the depository regulators that works along the FDIC and works with the Federal Reserve Bank for bank holding companies. They're also joined by the National Credit Union Administration for credit unions. So all of these depository regulators work together. For the OCC, their primary entity that they regulate are national banks, US federal branches of foreign banks, and federally chartered thrift institutions. It is an independent bureau of the US Treasury, and they work to ensure the safety and soundness of the national banking system. And so the OCC operates in such a way, and actually, let's go to the next slide. The OCC operates in such a way that it uses its examination powers to ensure the soundness and safety of the US banking system. What they will do is issue regulations that address risk management practices. You'll use their examination powers to monitor and enforce the ways in which banks will comply with what they call scenario analysis or risk management models, and they will take a look at those risks and develop a scenario. What would happen if? And if you go to the next slide, you look at what would happen if you had a variety of risk events, a strategic risk event where they've made poor decisions that could lead to a drop in asset value. What happens if you had operational risk? Increasingly, information technology falls under that bucket. Compliance risk. What if they failed to follow OCC regulations and maintain the capital reserves? What happens with credit risk or liquidity risk? We just discussed those in a little bit of context. So all of those risks are part of a scenario analysis that a particular bank's assets or resources are tested to determine, can they remain well capitalized through those crises? And so OCC will direct good risk management practices as part of that financial regulating role. But there is also a responsibility among those regulated entities to engage in smart corporate practices. If you go to the next slide, please. So that includes every corporation must engage in its own risk management process where they identify risk, they identify risk management practices, so that as well as a financial regulatory responsibility, there's also an opportunity, whether you're working with shareholders of these financial institutions, to ensure that they're engaging in good corporate governance, that they have engaged in good practices that allow for assessments of risk. And climate-related financial risk is essential for their risk management processes, their audit management processes, and their reporting functions to other securities regulators like the SEC. Next slide, please. So on December 16th, I'm sorry, I'm looking at a different set of slides. Again, Tracy, no, please go to the next one. I just had this chart in, if you go to the next slide, the 4 different lines there demonstrate the difference between the bottom line. What does 1.5 look like? A slow and steady decline in emissions so that we can get to 1.5. That lower line is a sign of stable financial transition. When you get to 3 degrees, that top line, that's a worst case scenario. That means there is a disorderly transition. And there again, if you have increased instances of frequent and intense weather events, floods, wildfires, and you have $1 billion, multi-billion dollar event after another, those are disorderly events that would have a negative impact on the economic and financial stability of the country. Next slide, please. So this particular slide gives that particular description a little bit more granularity. Again, regulators are in a position now to ensure a much more orderly transition and one that is less likely to have an abrupt and negative impact on the financial and economic system. Next slide, please. And we can skip this one. We can go to the next slide. Again, looking at those risks in the context of credit risk and market risk. I want to look at this slide about the Financial Stability Oversight Council, the FSOC. This was an entity that was developed in response to the financial crisis, came about as a result of Dodd-Frank. And I have this slide here because I really want to emphasize in financial institutions like the OCC do not operate in a vacuum. It will be incredibly necessary for all of these entities to work together in concert to have the same standards to really increase that time frame for assessing climate risk. Currently, they use 9 consecutive quarters as the time frame for assessing financial vulnerabilities under those risk models. And so as you can see, the OCC is a member of that of the FSOC. And so we're on December 16th, when the OCC issued its draft supervisory guidance about banks, it was a huge milestone. It was the first regulator of financial banks to make an affirmative statement about climate-related financial risk as a concern of bank management practices. And East will go into a little bit more discussion about that at the end of the presentation. I just have a few more slides, but there are a few points that I really want to emphasize. Next slide, please. So first, many of us have been particularly appalled and concerned about the huge amount of fossil fuel investment the biggest banks are currently engaged in. On here, this is a chart from, and there's a link in the resources for the full top 100 financial holding companies. And as you can see, the biggest funders of fossil fuels are also among the world's biggest financial holding companies. And that includes JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, I think Wells Fargo also, which didn't make the top 5. Next chart. One of the challenges, next slide. One of the challenges of regulation is understanding the interconnected and layers of regulation involved. So please note that on the left-hand side where you see National Bank, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is responsible for regulating the national bank portion of that financial holding company. But at the very top, the Federal Reserve is responsible for regulating that parent financial holding company. And then if you look in the middle, the securities arm of that holding company is governed by SEC regulations. And then far right, the loan company may be subject to regulations of the Consumer Financial Protection Board. And this is not to mention any of the state regulations, banking regulations that these entities might have to comply with. So please note that there is a complex layered network of regulation that occurs with these large financial institutions, and that it is incredibly critical to ensure coordination, communication, and that the standards are aligned so that any of the impacts that we recognize as severe weather events, fluctuations in energy pricing, asset values, that the OCC works in coordination with those other institutions. So I look forward to, in the months to come, to see more guidance like the OCC released in December of 16. I look forward to more opportunities for us as a community to support these efforts, to acknowledge this risk now, to protect the stability of the financial system by engaging regulators now, not to wait, because waiting is a disorderly transition and does not make for a stable transition. Next slide, please. And so again, call to action here. I think I'm going to, at this point in time, pass the baton over to East. East, thank you so much. And STMP and all of those who sponsored events, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think, Tracy, back to you for a moment before I dive into the action overview.
Oh, thank you so much, East. Well, first, Attorney Hamilton, if I can call you Lisa Ann, I just want to say thank you so much for that presentation. I do this work actually with my colleagues, East and Deanna on this call. We deal with this all the time, and I learned so much today. So I really appreciate that. But the OCC, as Attorney Hamilton explained, is something that everybody should know about. And I think East is going to tell us a little bit about the call to action to the OCC. And East, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Let me see if I can manage to pin myself here. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat as well, just appreciating our excellent speakers. Much agreement from me. As Dr. Hamilton described a little bit, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is seeking input from members of the public like you and me on their historic guidance to tell big banks how they should deal with climate risk. And no understatement, this is the first time a federal regulator has laid out expectations for how banks should incorporate climate-related threats into their governance, planning, and risk management. So the draft guidance that the OCC has issued starts setting expectations for what regulators want to see around climate risk when they examine whether banks are operating in a manner that is safe and sound. And it marks a really important step forward in protecting financially vulnerable communities, including and especially Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, as well as really importantly, holding banks accountable to their climate commitments. And very exciting news, we have the opportunity to let the OCC know that we support this guidance that they have issued and want them to go forward with it and take even more important regulatory steps in the future to curb the influence and financing that we're seeing from Wall Street that is pouring toxic money into communities, fossil fuel projects, destruction of our health and our planet. So I'm going to talk you through submitting a comment while Erica continues to screen share. Thank you, Erica. And then we'll take a couple minutes after we've done the demonstration for folks who are on the webinar with us to submit your comment right now. This is going to be a huge show of support. We have almost 200 people here. The OCC has received about 3,000 comments so far, so 200 more in just one night. It's going to make a big difference. We know that the opposition, the big banks themselves, as well as the fossil fuel lobbies, are going to be submitting comments saying that it's not the OCC's job to do this regulation, but we know that the health of our communities, our planet, but also the health of our financial system depends on curbing this financing into fossil fuels. So Erica has the page up and we are dropping the link into the chat. Aki just dropped it there. We have instructions in both Spanish and English. So there's 2 different links for those. When you pull up this instructions page, you're going to want to click right where Erica is hovering over. It says this link to head to the comment submission website. I recommend opening that in a new tab because it will take you over there. You can also, and then you want to have copied the sample comment from the instructions page and paste that into the comment box there. I encourage you, if you have words to share, to say a little bit about why this issue matters to you personally, why you are really passionate about the OCC implementing strong guidance. And that's all you have to do is for the comment itself. You can add a little bit more there as Erica is demonstrating. You don't need to attach any files. It does give you that option there. And then you'll scroll down. You do have to give them an email address. You're going to want to mark that you are an individual, that left blue box there. And then they'll ask you to fill out your contact information. You only have to add your name, but you can, if you like to, add your geographic information as well. You want to click the box saying you're not a robot, and then scroll down a little bit further and hit submit comment. So we just submitted our first comment of the night. Maybe some of you did it along with Erica. We're going to take a couple minutes now to submit additional comments. So everybody go ahead and click the link in the chat that Aki has sent there. She'll send it again a couple more times. Copy the sample, drop that into the comment. It says that you support the guidance the OCC has put together. You want them to continue to protect our economy, our financial system, and our communities going forward. we're going to take a couple minutes now for everybody to go ahead and do that. And then we are running ahead of schedule. What a miracle. So I'm hoping we can keep our panelists around a little bit longer for some Q&A. And if we share our questions out loud, they will all be interpreted into Spanish and ASL, which means everybody can access them. If they're in the chat, they're mostly just in English. So we will come back with answers to your questions at 7:53 Eastern Time. If you'd like to put questions in the chat now, that's great. But for now, click on that link, go submit a comment to the OCC. You can also type in the chat once you've submitted your comment and let us know, and we can be celebrating along the way. Aki is reading my mind. For a little, getting some people done already. Very exciting. The link in the chat will bring you to an instructions page. From the instructions page, it'll say how to submit a comment. Number 1 there, where it says this link, that's what you have to click on to actually get to the regulations page. And we want you to head to that instructions page, because then you can copy the sample. And if you scroll to the bottom of it, which Eric is going to show us, so you can copy the sample there and submit it. She already did. If you scroll to the bottom of the instructions page as well, so the one on the STMP website, there are some buttons to share this action on social media. So you can immediately go ahead and share on Facebook or Twitter, let friends know that they have just 6 days to tell the OCC to make these important climate guidelines implemented. Great. If you do submit personal information, that stuff can come up in the public file, but if you don't have to put a phone number, I don't think. Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody, for submitting. Let's see. I'm trying to see if we have questions for our panelists. I'm going to bring our panelists onto our pinned menu.
Well, while you're doing that, East, I'll or wait, do you want me to do the summary yet?
Oh, the summary.
I can do that.
It's like we're over time. It's great. Sure, we can do that and then see if there are any questions that arise in the chat. That's perfect. Thank you, Tracy.
No problem. First of all, thank you everyone for leveraging our collective voices to really make some serious change. And I want to thank our incredible speakers who, in my flu haze, completely dropped the ball, and I did not give you the beautiful introductions that Aki drafted, and they're beautiful. So I just want to say that it's totally my fault. But I think everybody knows that you both are awesome. So, and my apologies. But I just wanted to say that for review tonight, there's 3 pretty good takeaways that include: 1, despite a clear understanding that we need to curb our addiction to fossil fuels, big banks continue to fund the fossil fuel industry, shocker. And they've invested $3.8 trillion since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. So not decreasing investment, increasing investment. Increasing investment means increased exploration, increased oil, increased greenhouse gases, increased temperature, increased climate crisis. Make it make sense. So the second takeaway is that federal regulators have the authority and the tools to both manage climate-related risks to communities and our financial system. They can do that right now, and we need to make sure that they do. And thirdly, so from that, we know that the OCC's guidance is an important step towards making sure that big banks mitigate those climate-related threats to financial stability and our communities. And what I would like to ask folks is keep your eyes peeled to your inbox for some additional resources. A recording of this training, you can just skip over the parts with me in it. All the slides, those responses to questions from the chat that my colleagues have so ably collected. And this is just number one in a 4-part training. So we really encourage you to sign up for part 2 of our toxic money training series later this month. That's focused on another key regulator, our central bank, the Federal Reserve. So keep your eyes peeled for that invite. And I just want to say it's going to take all of us to stop Wall Street from causing more harm. And we have another tool that we can use to wield collectively: financial regulation. So definitely sign up for those new trainings, and so you can learn more and look out for other ways to get involved. And East, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers. Let me see if I can sneak in one question here. It's sometimes a tricky one, but we had somebody ask about unproven technology like carbon capture use and storage, or different forms of carbon pricing, and whether those are some of the measures that the OCC considers valid for banks managing their climate risk. So Lisa or Tracy, can either of you speak a little bit to that question, whether offsets are a part of the equation?
I will definitely.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Go right ahead. No, I think this is all you.
Well, you're gonna probably have to pull me off my soapbox. The carbon offset phenomena is terribly disturbing because it is a false solution based on very funny math. That there are many reasons to be concerned that it's simply financial gymnastics to demonstrate emission reductions without real emission reductions. Right now, just because of the Article 6 was confirmed at the end of COP26, and so voluntary carbon markets now are available to all of these private institutions to use to fulfill their net zero commitments. But currently, that is not part of any assessment as of yet as to how that's going to, what kind of role it's going to play on balance sheet. So yeah, that was my 2 cents.
I will add in 1 cent to that. That carbon capture.
It's 8 o'clock.
Oh, sorry, that's just my Mac robot. The carbon capture is really a false solution. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work. Yet our government uses our taxpayer dollars to subsidize it to tunes of billions of dollars. That really goes directly into the pockets of the fossil fuel industry to harm our climate. So why are we doing it? Don't even ask me, because it's nuts. But that's carbon capture.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers, Sharon, Lisa, and Tracy, for presenting and powering through. Thank you to the language justice team, Washanda, MJ, Alexia, Yaya, and our captioners, Rita and Isela. And we'll answer your questions from the chat We'll send out a resource pack over email. So we'll have lots of answers to questions in there. And our next training on the Federal Reserve, as Tracy said, is going to be on February 24th. So save the date and we'll be in touch soon with the Zoom registration link. With that, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our webinar. Hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome.